My name is Ben, and last summer I took a solo backpacking trip deep into the unexplored regions of Northern Ontario, Canada. I wanted absolute silence and untouched wilderness. After hiking for 3 days, I found an incredibly remote, overgrown clearing that looked like an old, forgotten logging camp from the 1940s. The air was clean, the silence was perfect, and in the center of the clearing stood an ancient, cracked stone well covered by a rusted iron lid. I made camp immediately. I was meticulous about my water supply, but on the second morning, I realized I had accidentally cracked my main water filter bottle. I had enough reserves for 1 day, but the nearest stream was miles away. I looked at the old well. The iron lid was heavy, but I managed to pry it off. Inside, the water was clear, deep, and looked pristine. It was gravity-fed, so I rationalized it wasn't contaminated like standing water. I scooped out about a liter using my small cooking pot. I boiled it for 5 full minutes, then filtered it through my emergency cloth. It tasted slightly metallic, but I was too thirsty to care. That evening, the symptoms started. Not stomach sickness, but something far worse. A deep, searing pain began in my feet, traveling up my legs. I checked my feet. They were swollen, unnaturally pale, and felt cold to the touch, despite the warm fire. I looked closely at my left big toe. There was a small, perfectly round, pitch-black circle under the skin. It looked like a permanent, deep bruise, but it was hard and slightly raised. I dismissed it as circulation trouble from the long hike, but the color was terrifying. The next morning, the black circles had multiplied, spreading across the soles of both my feet like ink spots. I couldn't walk. I was feverish and shivering uncontrollably. I knew I was poisoned, but I didn't know by what. As I lay in my tent, paralyzed by the fever, I heard a sound that wasn't natural. The wind wasn't howling, it was whispering. Not words, but a drawn-out, cold, high-pitched sigh that seemed to originate from the mouth of the old well itself. It was the sound of something ancient and sick. I desperately reached for my satellite phone. It was my only link to civilization. I managed to get a signal and called my brother, Mark. I described the symptoms, the pain, and the black marks. Before I could mention the well, the line broke up and Mark's voice became garbled. His last clear words were, "Get out of the water, it's not." Then the signal died completely. I was truly alone, and the only water I had was from the well. I tried to crawl out of the tent. My legs were useless. I looked at my hands. The black spots were now on my palms, running along the veins, turning the skin a dark, mottled gray-blue. The black circles from my feet had started to ooze a thin, metallic-smelling fluid. My body was being slowly poisoned from the inside out, and the marks were expanding like a virulent internal mold. I dragged myself toward the well, using my elbows. I needed to understand what was in that water. I reached the stone lip of the well. As I leaned close, I noticed something carved into the ancient stones that the rust had hidden. A series of crude, pre-modern symbols. They weren't letters, but geometric shapes, intersecting triangles and circles, repeated in a pattern that made my eyes hurt. Beneath the symbols, I found a single word carved deep into the stone: void. I had to attract attention. I knew my brother would alert the authorities when I didn't call back. I reached into my pack for the emergency flare gun. It was my last hope. I loaded the flare, aimed it straight up into the dense, dark canopy, and pulled the trigger. The flare shot out with a blinding flash and a high whistle, soaring over the trees. It lasted only a few seconds, but the red light was visible for miles. I prayed someone saw it. I waited, listening desperately for the sound of a helicopter or even an ATV. Nothing. Only the faint, repetitive whispering sigh from the well. Then I heard a different sound, a soft, wet, snapping noise coming from the trees. It was slow and rhythmic. It was the sound of a large, heavy animal moving through the undergrowth, breaking branches deliberately, heading toward the clearing. It wasn't natural. It sounded stalking. I managed to drag myself behind a fallen log, gripping my small, dull camping knife. The silence broke. A large, dark mass burst into the clearing. It wasn't a bear or a deer. It was a man, wearing old, torn logging clothes, but his skin was covered in the exact same pitch-black spots and mottled grayness as mine. He wasn't running. He was lumbering, his limbs moving stiffly and unnaturally. He saw me and let out a choked, wet sound. Not a roar, but a desperate cry of hunger.
He fell on me instantly. His strength was immense, fueled by whatever poison was coursing through his veins. He didn't use a weapon. He used his hands. He clamped his hand down on my face, and I felt his long, thick fingernails slice into my cheek, tearing the skin open. Blood, warm and sudden, poured down my neck. I stabbed him wildly with the camping knife, hitting his shoulder and arm, but he didn't seem to feel it. He was trying to tear off my face with his bare hand.
I managed to kick him off. As he stumbled back toward the well, he paused. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking at the well. His eyes, already bloodshot, widened with a terrifying mix of lust and desperation. He ignored me completely, stumbling past the well and falling into the dense undergrowth on the opposite side of the clearing. He was being pulled toward the source of the contamination, deeper into the forest. I was left alone, bleeding, poisoned, and unable to walk. I knew my only chance was to leave the well. I used my knife to cut my pack in half, grabbing only the most essential items: my radio, a first aid kit, and my last energy bar. I began to crawl away from the clearing, moving painfully slowly, trying to follow the faint game trail I had used days before. Every inch was agony, but the memory of that man's face, covered in black spots and hunger, pushed me forward. After what felt like a day of crawling, I reached the highest point I could manage and collapsed. I used my radio to send out a low-power distress signal, just clicks and static, hoping for a miracle. 2 hours later, I woke up to the deafening sound of a rescue helicopter hovering above the trees. My brother, worried sick after the aborted call, had sent the search and rescue team to my last known coordinates. The doctors never found a clear contaminant. They called it a highly aggressive metal toxicity mixed with a rare fungal infection. but the strange, round black spots remained a mystery. They had to perform immediate, painful skin grafts on my hands and feet to remove the spreading necrotic tissue. I survived, but I have permanent, mottled gray scars on my body. The government eventually sent a team to the coordinates I provided. They found the well, but it was empty, filled with dry dirt and capped with a fresh, heavy concrete slab. The well in the woods had been sealed, but the terrifying silence it left behind is a permanent scar on my mind.